morning, everyone. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman. We're off to an appropriately leisurely start. We got some more members joining us. We didn't think the room was large enough yesterday, so we wanted more commodious accommodations today. Yeah, we want a little distance between us. Yeah, well, the temperature's a little more accommodating, and we hope that the audio is as well. Thank you all for being here. I will call the meeting to order. I detect a quorum, and anything for the good of the order before we get back to our notebooks here?
I thought you told Senator Cal was in the other room.
He may be the last member who is in the wrong room, but all right, Lenise, we're going to pick up here with Gary West behind tab 7 here, the background on sprinkler requirements in places of worship and assembly. This could have been last, but we decided we'd start with it first. As you wish, either at the table or the podium, wherever you're comfortable. That's fine. Thank you. Would you double check and make sure that mic is on? There should be on the right.
Okay, is that?
There we go.
Okay,
now we're
sorry about
Thank you.
that. Yeah. So, thank you all for allowing me to come this morning and speak. I want to just kind of cover some things, an overview at the high level, looking at this, and then I'm going to ask a couple of my staff members just to kind of give a summary of that. In most communities, regardless of size, churches are typically the largest buildings that are there, and it's the one that probably most fire departments are least prepared for. I personally have been on several church fires, and they are really dangerous. By having built-in fire protection, it reduces the risk for both the occupants, but primarily the firefighters. The firefighters are the ones that are in danger. Many have complicated floor plans and require firefighters to go deep into the buildings when they're on fire. Every building built has a required fire flow. That is the amount of water that's needed to extinguish a fire. And based on how far the fire has progressed will determine how much water is needed to extinguish that fire. And the one thing that works against us always is time. The fire typically in today's world grows very rapidly. Our fire loads today are higher than they've ever been. Our potential for injury for firefighters are higher than it's ever been. This GPM flow has to be provided by either the required fire flow has to be provided either by the fire department bringing water in or using fire hydrants or being able to have a built-in suppression system. Many of the fire chiefs in the past across the state have been asked to certify or asked to say or actually give an affidavit that they can handle a fire of this size. And a lot of them have been pressured to do that, but in almost every case, we see that that's not even possible. And the larger the building, the more difficult it is to carry water to the scene to extinguish a fire. This is also an insurance risk that affects insurance premiums, not just for the occupants or the people who own the building, but also for the community, because the community is rated on the buildings that the fire department cover. in churches, occupant loads may be low at times, and then, as you all know, that there's peak times when those occupancies get really loaded. It's really no different. In fact, they're classified. All of them are classified as assembly occupancies, and an assembly occupancy is exactly what we're in today. It's a theater. It's a restaurant. All of these are assembly occupancies, and they're all treated the same way. And it's basically based on history of what has happened with fires around the country. So there's a limit that is set on the number of occupants before fire sprinklers are required, and that number is 400. So I say, where does that number come from? Why is it 400? Why is it not 375? Or why is it not 450? Well, it has to do with the history of fires around the country. And why is this not a more significant issue now? Why do we not hear more about it, about fires in these places, assembly occupancies? And the reason is because that they are required to have fire sprinklers, and they do save lives. The other thing is that the fire department capabilities in every community differ. And in the rural areas, the ability to extinguish a fire in a large building is very difficult. We have fires church fires in Tennessee all the time. In fact, we just had one yesterday down near Saudi Daisy at just north of Saudi Daisy at Sail Creek. And it was a lightning strike to a church. And the local fire department there is a small fire department, and they were able to make a difference. They were able to extinguish that fire, but only with the help of other fire departments responding in. No single fire department really has the capability to, in the rural areas, to handle one of these problems by itself. They need help. So the question that we asked from the State Fire Marshal's office is why would you want to exempt churches from fire sprinklers requirements? It's an assembly occupancy, just like this room is. And if you loaded this room down, of course, it would have to be also require safety measures to assure that we got out. In these large structures where there's large open areas, there's a potential for collapse of the building, and it happens very rapidly. And that's where we see most of our firefighters getting killed. And then the other thing is that in our meetings that we've had with staff here earlier, is that maybe this should be changed. Maybe we should change it from 400 occupants to 450 or to 500 or something like that before fire sprinklers are required. But if we do that, we feel like that should be done in the codes and not really in statute, because the codes anyone can take a code change through the process, and anyone can get a code changed. But what I feel like that they would see by doing that is that there's a lot of history and a lot of things that have happened that the 400 number is set there for a reason, and that's because of lives saved. So I want to take just another minute, if I could, and allow Peyton Bullen, who is our Director of Policy and Programs for us, just to speak for just a minute.
Thank you, Mr. West. And Peyton, if you would just for the record state your name and your position.
Yes, sir. Good morning. My name is Peyton Bullen. I'm Director of Fire Prevention Programs and Policy Development. Appreciate the time this morning to speak to you. I'm actually called the stat guy, but I'm just going to give you some high-level numbers here. There's approximately 32 structure fires a year that are church fires. In those fires in the state of Tennessee, roughly the losses incurred average $92,000, okay? And the U.S., from 2007 to 2011, approximately 1,780 fires occurred, in which the loss incurred was $62,000. So the state of Tennessee already sees a 48% increase in cost per loss. Average loss incurred in a sprinkled church in the state of Tennessee is $14,467. Average loss in a non-sprinkled church, $122,590. That's a difference of 82%. Approximately 96% of churches are not sprinkled currently. And through that, what you see is a substantial loss incurred across the board. Approximately 19 civilians a year die in structure fires that are church-related. And here most recently in the state of Tennessee, in the last month, we've had 3 structure fires, most recently here, and one of which 2 firefighters were injured, and that was in Memphis. Another one was in Nashville, where another firefighter was injured in a minor fall. And then in Dandridge, Tennessee, they had a complete loss for the House of Prayer. And so what you see is consistently firefighters being injured, which it poses a direct threat to firefighters, obviously the large assembly type buildings. But let me bring you back to this. We feel like we're pretty far removed from 100 people dying in structure fires. It doesn't happen that often. But I want to remind you of 2003. There was a nightclub fire in which there was 462 occupants, in which 100 people perished that night. The building should have been sprinkled, but through an exemption, they absolutely didn't see that it should have been. And so I don't want it to remove that, but I want to say this. Since 1994, there have been approximately 12 firefighters perished. Most firefighters die of heart attacks, but in this scene, if you look at the 12 that have passed away, only 1 died of heart attacks, the rest died of collapse and asphyxiation through being trapped. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. And next we have another. And just for the audience here, now are all of you technically in the employ of the Department of Commerce and Insurance? Yes, an assistant commissioner, and then thank you, welcome. Give us your name and title, please.
My name is Chris Bainbridge. I'm the Director of Codes Enforcement in the State Fire Marshal's Office.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to provide a little clarification on a couple of things. One is that the codes for fire sprinklers in churches are not retroactive, so the code would not require existing churches to be sprinklered. It would only apply to new buildings. And I would also like to just note that there are solutions to sprinklering churches in rural areas that don't have a municipal water supply. There are tanks or ponds that can be used and pumps, and they have been used. My office approves churches all the time, and we have had several that have utilized an alternative water source. So it can be done, and it does not prevent a church from building in a rural area.
Let me ask, Commissioner, if you want to come back up. I haven't seen the bill itself, but the bill that's referenced in our book, House Bill 1649 by Representative Hill, 1749 by Senator Nicely, was proposed to create some exemptions for these particular places of worship with the 6 or 7 categories listed there, criteria listed there. I gather from your testimony that you just assume we not entertain legislation like that.
That would be our wish. I think that the codes they really work, and we see that, and we can back that up with statistics. And in Tennessee, our mission is to make sure that everything's safe. We also understand that these rural communities, they want to build nice churches, and they want to take care of their community, and we're available to work with them any way we can, and we want to look at alternatives there with pumps and ponds and things like that. Anything that we can do to work with them, but the loss of you build a church and then you lose it in a fire, and a lot of these fires are honestly, a lot of them are set fires, a lot of them are arsons, and that loss to the community is devastating, and every community that's had that is like that. and I understand that the bill is about the rural areas, and the exemptions are pushed to those, but those are the ones that have the little volunteer fire departments that are difficult to staff and have long response times. So,
I appreciate that. We've got a few questions. Mayor Rowland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner West, this may be a question for Mr. Manning's namesake back there, Peyton, the stat man. These fires that you mentioned, I believe, Peyton, you mentioned the number of fires and the cost of damage. How many of these fires, if you know, happened when the building was not occupied? And were you named after Peyton Manning?
To answer your second question, no, sir, but my family's from Mississippi originally, and so my mom went to Ole Miss about the same time Archie did. So,
All right.
So, to answer your second question about the time of which the church fires occur, if you look at the majority of the buildings, I can't speak directly to the Tennessee ones because we didn't pull the stats specifically for that. But if you give me 1 second, it says 2007 to 2011, fires were least likely to take place during the overnight hours with a 12-hour period between 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. However, it represented, give me 1 second here. Oh, and it says 40% of the fires occurred in properties with no fire detection equipment. So specifically to Tennessee, no, sir, I do not have the time of which the fires occur. So.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I can say from experience that in most cases the buildings, the church fires that I'm aware of and the ones that I've been on myself were not occupied at the time of the fire. But firefighters responded to all of those.
Thank you. Mr. McMahon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, in these rural churches, are you aware of where most of the cost comes when or who pays for the cost of putting in the sprinkler system of the rural churches today, especially the ones that already have them, have been built? Who incurs that cost mostly? Church?
The church does.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you aware of any grants or any kind of monies available to churches outside of the counties that they're in that could help them specifically with fire prevention? And the reason I say this, I live in a rural community, and I have attended and even been a member of small churches before. I never knew of a grant or anything that covered this, but I was wondering if you did, and if you did, would that be something that your office would help facilitate for churches that were looking to comply if the law was not changed?
Okay, so as far as I know, there's no grants that I'm aware of that have to do with the building itself. Now, there are grants that are available to improve water systems to that, and really that's what they need in a lot of cases. Is the water system built to the facility or to the church? Does that make sense?
Yes, sir, it does. I know that I'm from East Tennessee. We're topographically challenged, shall we say, there in that tanks are very, very popular, and they're more popular than pumps because they're cheaper than pumps, getting a tank. And I know in a rural community you can have a tank, and it can service your community as a water source, even a brown water source for this. But excuse me. But also it could serve as fire protection. But a 5,000 gallon or a $500,000 tank or gallon tank usually costs up to $750 million. Communities don't have that, and they usually go through CDBGs. I don't know of any. The reason I say that is it would have to be a tank. A line like that would have to service an entire community other than just a church. But if a church is sitting by itself in a rural area, how do they find the extra money to be able to comply? That was my, and I didn't know if you knew anything about that.
There are other alternatives. The water system grants, there are some of those out there. And some of these areas, they're so rural that it's virtually impossible. And I'm from Gatlinburg. I know exactly what you're talking about topography.
I'm from Cock County, just right above you, so you know.
But I think that what Chris had mentioned up here earlier about alternative water supplies, we're talking about a tank on site. We're talking about a tank that belongs to the church, or maybe a pond that is there on site, somewhere to get a water supply to feed that fire sprinkler system. It could even be from a stream. And the church that brought this in question, it's my understanding that there is a stream that is nearby, but there's a cost to get the water from the stream to the building too. So I do think that the most affordable thing is to have something that would provide water for that particular building, and not necessarily for the community. Now, if it was available, if water mains were able to be put in and it was available, then through grants and stuff, then that would be the least expense to the church.
Yeah, and I'll end on this. I know that I know that you know this, being from Sevier County and Gatlinburg, that it's there's a lot of communities that do not have potable water lines, and so that's drinking water or even brown water systems. So that can be a challenge, especially during a drought when they have to go down the river and draw. And it's usually the volunteer fire departments that are first on the scene in the rural areas like that. Anyway, yeah. So I was just curious as if you knew of any way of any financial relief to help churches that are applying and trying to build in code, if that was something that you could help us understand.
I don't know of individual grants like that for them. Okay. I would say this, though, is that the alternatives include putting a water tank on site. I mean, and these tanks can be they can be something that's been donated or reclaimed or something, and where I'm from, we feel that the fire department would go out and fill those tanks up with water, and then that would be their water supply just for the sprinkler system.
Right.
So
yeah.
That's another option.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Commissioner. I appreciate it. Mr. Chair, that's all I have.
Any questions? Any additional questions for the Commissioner? This is just sort of the kickoff, if you want to call it that, for the study that Tasser will be doing into the issue, but it certainly sets the stage, and we appreciate it very much.
And I want to say thank you again, and I also want to say that to us, the most important thing to us is that if it needs to be changed, then we would prefer that it be changed in the code itself rather than having amendments to all of our codes that we have. And that's what I want to end on, if that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
And
good point.
Thank you all for listening to us and working with us and everything, too.
Thanks for your service. We appreciate it. Next, behind tab 8, I will yield to Ms. Rorick Patrick on the issue of BEP and the study that is underway. We have Commissioner Stephen Smith will be with us, but Lanice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doesn't sound like the mic is on. Governor Haslam formed a task force to look into the state education funding formula earlier this year, and asked that I be a member of it because of the work that Tasser does on these kinds of issues. Stephen is here today to talk about that, and give us some background on it, and we thought this would be an opportune time, since we're also presenting to you what the fiscal capacity figures are for the upcoming school year. The task force has 12 members on it, and Stephen will be telling us a little bit more about that and the work that we've done so far. We've met 3 times and had a series of presentations on various aspects of the state funding formula, including the fiscal capacity figures that are supplied by us as well as by the University of Tennessee Center for Business and Economic Research. We've also had a session where we went over in great detail each element of the funding formula itself, exactly how all of those things work and fit together. And I believe the next meeting is going to be focused on how other states do similar kinds of things. So, Commissioner?
Good morning. Thank you, Lanice, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Stephen Smith. I'm an Assistant Commissioner with the Department of Education, and appreciate the opportunity to be with you this morning to give you an update on the Basic Education Program Task Force that was created by Governor Haslam earlier this year. As you all are well aware, the last major revision to the BEP, known as BEP 2.0, was in 2007, and certainly a lot has changed in the education landscape since that time. And considering this, as well as recognizing concerns that have been raised by both small and large school districts about the formula, and in particular about the way that the formula distributes the funds that we have, we felt it was an appropriate time to step back, take a fresh look at the formula, identify strengths and weaknesses, and determine whether changes needed to be made. Of course, school finance decisions are challenging, and funding formulas are, by their very nature, complex and complicated. And there will always be questions about the fairness of any funding formula that is utilized. There'll be questions about how the formula works. In my experience, there are not many people who really love the BEP funding formula. People will make different points about the formula, and generally what you find is that people will say that the formula needs to be changed, and they all believe that if the formula is changed, then that will result in more funding for their particular district, and at best, about half of them are right. So with that said, that's not a reason to shy away from studying this issue and analyzing, and doing so in an open and transparent manner, and that's what the members of this task force have been charged to do. We have a very distinguished group of task force members. Of course, Lanice is a member. Comptroller Wilson is a member of the group. We have actually some members in the audience. We have representatives from county governments and city governments. Mr. Connor and Mr. Krasinski are in the audience, and they are members of the task force. We have representatives from large and small school districts. We have representatives from the House and the Senate, and then also members of the administration. Commissioner Huffman is the chair of the task force, and then Commissioner Martin with FNA is also a member of the task force. And Mr. Mark Cate with the governor's office is a member. And these individuals were chosen because of the knowledge that they can bring to the table on these issues, and also because these are individuals that we know will focus on what's best for the entire state and not on any one particular district. And that's extremely important when you're talking about making adjustments, potential adjustments to the funding formula. People have different opinions about what this task force should be or what it should do. I think it's important to note Tennessee's history of fiscal responsibility and also our budget realities and our budget constraints. And with that recognition, I think we all have to understand that the goal and charge for this group and this task force is not to increase the budget pie, but rather to determine the best way to distribute the resources that we have. With that said, I think it's also important to acknowledge that this education has been a major priority and a major budget priority for this administration and the General Assembly. Since 2011, Tennessee is one of only 6 states in the country that has consistently increased education spending in K through 12 as a percentage of our total budget. And since 2011, Tennessee has the 4th largest increase in education spending, and also our growth in teacher salaries since that time has doubled the national average. And that investment continues. For this next fiscal year, the General Assembly and the administration work together to appropriate $8.5 million that will go for teacher salaries in our lowest paying school districts. The original BEP and its future and its subsequent adjustments were adopted in large part due to Tennessee Supreme Court decisions, which found our previous funding formula unconstitutional because it did not provide an equal educational opportunity for all of the students in the state. And so we clearly have a duty to ensure educational equity, and again, that is the focus of this task force, and doing so in a manner that is clear and transparent. As Lenise said, to date we've had 3 meetings. First meeting was on March 24th. That was an introductory meeting, and then we also had a presentation on the history of the BEP and just an overview of the BEP. On May 7th, we had a state budget overview from Commissioner Martin, and then we really had a deep dive into the 2 fiscal capacity models that are used. Of course, the TASER model, which has been in place since the inception of the BEP, and then the SEBR model, otherwise known as the FOX model, which was implemented as part of BEP 2.0. But in our current state, we operate under a 50-50 model where we're using 50% TASER and 50% SEBR or FOX, and I think we all recognize that's not a place that we can remain indefinitely. And so one of the goals of this task force will be to look at all of those issues and determine what is the best model. And that doesn't necessarily mean that TASER or SEBR, that is a choice. We're going to take a look at all of the different issues and components and try to make a recommendation as to what is the best model for Tennessee. Our next meeting, and then on June 2nd, we had a thorough review of all 45 of the BEP components. We talked about how each of those is determined and calculated. And all of that information can actually be found on our website. It's also on the State Board of Education's website, State Board's website. And it's called, I have a copy here, it's the BEP Handbook. And it's about 120 pages, but it outlines each component in the formula, and you can look at that and you can actually see how each component is determined and how the funding for each component is calculated. And when we came to the department, one of the things that was communicated to us by the Comptroller Wilson is that there needed to be more transparency with the BEP funding formula, and we certainly agreed with that, and we took that seriously. And so that's why this handbook was developed, and I think it's been well received. But I think it's the first time that we really had something like this in place that people can go to and look at, and it's detailed to the point where there are files that are listed in the handbook, and so someone could actually come to the Department of Education and say, hey, I want to see this file, and they could come in and they can look at it. So we feel good about that handbook. We have more work to do in terms of transparency and communication, but we feel like we've made some improvements. Lastly, the governor has been very clear that there is no predetermined outcome for this task force. And so the work is not designed to lead us toward any one place. This is about gaining a solid understanding of where we are today and then making recommendations on where we should be in the future to make sure that this formula is the right one for Tennessee in today's environment. With that, I'll stop, and I'll thank you again for the invitation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Senator Henry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, on page 11, the next to last paragraph is entitled Ability to Pay. It says it's based on per capita personal income provided by the U.S. Department of Commerce, Bureau of Economic Analysis. Why would we go to a private organization instead of to a public record for that information?
Thank you, Senator Henry, for that question. I think I probably would defer to Lenise. That is part of the TASER fiscal capacity model and the calculation, and of course the Department of Education receives that figure from TASER. But I think I would defer to Lenise or someone else on that.
Lenise.
That is actually a federal agency that we get that data from, not a private sector organization. It's the United States Department of Commerce's Bureau of Economic Analysis, the same department where the Census Bureau resides and the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Okay. Oh, I see. All right. Thank you, Ms. Chan. Thank you, ma'am.
Other questions for Commissioner Smith? Yes, Mayor Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here. And I want to thank the governor and the department for putting this together. As you all know, and I'm probably most of the people on this panel know, I'm a very vocal critic of the BEP formula for a number of reasons. And just wanted to make a couple of points that I hope that you all will take into consideration. I'm sure you've heard me make these points before, but Sevier County, every time I meet someone from the administration, they tell me that we want Sevier County to do more, to send more money to the state of Tennessee, because we send, we're the third or fourth largest entity in the state that sends the most tax dollars. But what this formula does is the more tax dollars we send to the state of Tennessee, the less we get. And so that's not a very good incentive for us, although we do work hard to try to increase revenues. It's very discouraging that you have a formula, and I'm in particularly referring to the Fox formula. The Tasser formula certainly in my mind is much better than the Fox formula, because it does take into consideration, at least take into consideration per capita income, and I've never understood how you could do physical capacity without considering the per capita income of the residents of the area you're talking about. So I am a constant critic of the Fox formula, because I think it does not and I think if you look at the statistics on the per capita basis, of course, Sevier County is last in the state, and we're paying almost 63% of our total costs, and the state's picking up the rest. And the average in the state is 75%, that they're giving an average county. The state's picking up 75%, and in Sevier County, they're picking up about 38%. So, and we're on a maintenance level, or that would be lower. And the difference between us and the next county, and us and Knox County, is about $300, a little over $300, almost $350, which per pupil, which we think is too large a spread to be able to be justified, because we're getting about $2,700 from the state, and then Knox County's getting $3,050. Then you look at Williamson County, and I constantly am talking to my friend Rogers Anderson about the fact that Williamson County is one of the top 25 wealthiest counties, not in the state of Tennessee, but in the nation. And they get over $500 more per pupil than Sevier County gets, and 60% of our students are on free and reduced lunch. So I think there is something seriously wrong with this formula, and I appreciate your department and the governor asking this task force to take a look at it, and I hope that that you all will consider a lot of these factors that in coming up with something that and I'm not wanting to hurt any other system. Don't get me wrong. I just think that there is a system out there and a way to be more fair to the students in Sevier County, and that I hope that this task force will look closely at that, and I know they will. And again, I appreciate the governor appointing this task force and moving in that direction. So my question that I'm getting to is do you think is the task force is their charge? Are they going to look at a new formula? Are they going to try to tweak the formulas we have, or what was the exact charge of the task force as you understood it?
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor, the charge is to take a look at the entire formula, but really to focus on the distribution of the funds that we have available, and that of course would include taking a really deep look into the fiscal capacity model and making sure that all the factors are included are the right factors. And you bring up a really good point. Probably the most significant difference between the TASER model and the Fox model is the inclusion or exclusion of the per capita income. And so that's something that the task force, I think, will spend a lot of time talking about, is whether or not to include income. And there's a lot of debate about that, and Bill Fox will provide a very good reasoning for why you don't include per capita income, and what he would say is that that's not something that we tax in Tennessee, and so if you include it, you are including it as you're coming up with an arbitrary percentage or weight as to how you are going to include income. But I would anticipate that we will spend a lot of time talking about that very issue. And of course, the both models are looking at the revenue that is available in a particular district or county to fund education. And in particular, the Fox model will look at the sales tax base and the property tax base. And as you know, Sevier County has a large base, and when you're looking at just property and sales, that's why you see the numbers that you see from Sevier County.
Just one more comment, and I hope that you all will take a look at this as well. We have a couple of our cities that have the tourist development zones around their convention centers, but they're not just around the convention centers. They, in essence, in Sevierville, it takes in about 3/4 of the city of Sevierville, and in Pigeon Forge, it takes in half. Well, they get sales tax from those entities. The kicker in that is that sales tax is not divided with the school system. That goes entirely to the city to pay off debt. So what's happening to us is our sales tax collections are pretty flat because of that. When I say flat, I'm talking about what's going to the school system, because the growth in these areas are going to the cities to pay off debt. It's not shared on a 50-50 basis like the rest of the sales tax is. But the formula treats it just like the schools is getting 50% of that sales tax. And so that punishes us as well. But it treats the sales tax saying that we're getting that, and we're actually not. It's going totally to the cities. The state doesn't even get their share of that. That's going to pay off debt, which concerns us a great deal, because it's our revenues are flat, and then at the same time we're not able to get any additional monies through the BEP, so we're in sort of a bind every year, as a lot of people are, trying to figure out how we're going to fund all of these. Last year we had to fund nearly $5 million in technology improvements for the school and other things that other systems are having to fund, and we're just concerned about that, and hope you all will look at that as well as you look at the formula.
Senator Kyle.
Members of the committee, I was on the Senate Education Committee when the BEP was first enacted, and during the McWhirter administration, and it was a long and arduous process, many 5-4 votes and a lot of going in there, but it was all driven by the fact because we'd lost the lawsuit. I mean, that seems like what it takes to move the government here in Tennessee is we lose the lawsuit. And the basis was that some communities just didn't have the sales tax generators that other communities had, and consequently, when the big mall was built up there in Goodlettsville, right there on the county line, I mean, people, the money doesn't stop; it's where you spend the money. And we had places in some counties to spend the money, and they collected taxes, and we had some places that didn't. Their citizens generally shopped out of town. If you didn't have a car dealership or you didn't have a furniture store or hardware store or whatever in your community, then you didn't have a vehicle to collect money to fund your education system. And therefore, we ultimately worked very hard trying to come up with some way to balance it out. But I never could understand this, and back then I can't understand it now. That when we talk about my county can't afford to pay this, my county can't afford. If you look at the disparity in communities as to how much they pay part of their population for education. But it just seems to me that why a house in Sevier County that costs $100,000 and a house in Williamson County that costs $100,000, regardless of whatever the difference is, why is the tax for schools so different? Why is that contribute? If you can afford to live in a $100,000 house in one county and you can afford to live in a $100,000 house in another county, if you look at the disparity we have in what we're contributing to education, it just seems odd to me. I mean, why? If you can afford it, you can afford it. And if you have the capacity, you have the capacity. We've had counties in the state. We had a county in the state tell the Secretary of State to come get the books. We're not going to fund we're not going to fund the library anymore, because that wasn't our goal. Because it was the goal of our county commission to keep property taxes as low as possible. As long as county governments are allowed to keep property taxes as low as possible, and that's their number one goal, you're always going to be looking to how can I get the state to give me more money, because there isn't any other source of money there. So I wish you well with with this idea of redoing this formula. I would say to you that it appears to me for you to be successful, at least 51% of the people who are getting less money now are going to have to get more, and the people who are getting more money now are going to have to get less, or you're not going to pass it. I mean, you're just going to be arranging where we are, because what it really comes down to is we don't have the capacity to force local governments to fund their educational systems at a certain level. We've never done that. We don't believe in doing that. I'm not advocating that, but that's what we seem to be trying to do, is a fair way to send state dollars to local governments who have decided they don't have the money themselves to do it. So I wish, again, that that's one of the things I will miss next year for not being here.
Unless it goes to court, in which case, never mind. That's right. Then there'll be justice. Other questions for Commissioner Smith? One question we have is whether in your future meetings there will be an opportunity for folks to appear and give some testimony, as Mayor Waters has done here today, just in that forum.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Senator. We are looking at that, and we do anticipate having a meeting where there could be some participation from people outside of the members of the task force. Okay. And also, all of the meetings are open, and we've had pretty good attendance and interest from the public.
Good, Senator Kyle.
Well, the BEP is kind of like the quarterback rating in the NFL. I mean, we all talk about it, but we don't really know exactly what goes into it. But I think one of the best things that our task force staff could do, and the department could do, is figure out a way to lay this formula out where someone could pick it up and look at it and understand what the rules of engagement are. I used to kid Andy Womack that he's one of the 7 people in Tennessee who knew the formula, knew how the BEP formula worked, and he said he didn't know if there were 7. But the fact of the matter is, this is something we talk about all the time, and it's something we don't really know what the components are. It's kind of like, it's like my mother we'd have roast beef on Sunday and hash on Tuesday, and we didn't know exactly what was in there, but we knew that's what it was going to be. And consequently, everyone talks about this, but I really think that would be one of the great benefits, I think, is the transparency of the formula, because then other people can look and see what we're doing, and they may have a better idea than the folks who are working on it. And they're never going. No one can ever. The legislators from Sevier County can't necessarily propose changes to the formula that would be more fair because they may not necessarily have all the information as to what the formula is. I mean, it's just there. So again, I would encourage that to me from the department standpoint and from TASER's standpoint. If you could, I know it'd be hard to drill this down to legislators being able to understand, but I think it would be very helpful. It's very helpful to do.
Mr. Shumpert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one thing I think you also, in this whole big picture of education, is really what is the cost of education. I think we keep talking about how we distribute, but do we really look at what the cost of education in Tennessee should be? Not what we're doing. And we're not always looking at what the true cost. And if the state doesn't recognize that cost, then that has to be picked up at the local level.
Commissioner, when is the what's your deadline, your target date for completion again?
The governor charged the task force with submitting a report by the end of the year.
Okay. Thank you. The previous governor referred to this as something created by a mad scientist, and anyway, I won't go there.
Well, Senator Kyle was talking about how in years past there were 7 people that understood the BEP. Nowadays, you hear that there are about 2, and Lanice is one of those. So it's decreased.
Thank you very much. Anything further for Stephen? Okay, it's important, and we'll look forward to your work product. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then finally, I believe today is our discussion on fiscal capacity. Here comes Michael. Michael will present.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
I'm going to be presenting the annual update on fiscal capacity. I'll first give you a summary of what fiscal capacity is. I'll briefly discuss the revision to per capita income that was done by the Federal Bureau of Economic Analysis. And then I'll give an update on the virtual school students in Union County situation. The funding formula for education in Tennessee is called the Basic Education Program. It divides the responsibility to fund education between local governments and the state government. And the local share for each county is determined by fiscal capacity. Now, the fiscal capacity is calculated by 2 models. One is TASER model, and the other comes from the University of Tennessee's Center for Business and Economic Research, or CBER. And the results of these 2 models are just averaged together. And this determines the local share for each school system, and then the state makes up the difference. The fiscal capacity model that TASER calculates is calculated once per year. It's a regression model. One thing that is possible is that the results of the model could be released a little earlier in the year to clear up the estimates that come from the Department of Education, but we're not sure about CBER's ability to do so. The model that TASER uses is the same model that we've used since the 1990s. It is a county-level model. Even though there are going to be 141 school systems in the state. There are only 95 counties, and so some counties are going to have more than one school system. And for those counties, the fiscal capacity is going to be considered the same across the county, both in the TASER and the CBER model. The data for the fiscal capacity model comes from various sources, all government sources. The tax base, the property tax and sales tax base numbers come from the Comptroller and the Department of Revenue, respectively. The average daily membership and revenue data comes from the Department of Education. Per capita income comes from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Now, as I mentioned before, the Bureau of Economic Analysis made revisions to their data this year, and it is normal to do revisions to data, but this year they had a revision that involved a change in the definition of some of the components of their data. To sum up some of the major changes, they adopted accrual method for pensions, wages, and salaries. They're using new county-level Medicare and SNAP data, and they improved the fixed income investment, which are assets held for 1 year or more. The revision applied to all 3 years that are used in the fiscal capacity model. The population data comes from the U.S. Census. Here is a list of all the data that is used.
Sorry, Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you leave that slide, please, Dr. Green explained this, but I never don't understand it. What is multiple regression analysis? What does that mean? How does it work?
Multiple regression analysis is a statistical method, and it's used to calculate a formula. So there's an equation for all 95 counties, and what the multiple regression model does is it assigns weights to each of the variables in the equation, the variables being sales tax base, property tax base, and so forth. And then the results are that a percentage is applied to each county of the state's total fiscal capacity, and those percentages will then add to 100%. Does that answer your question? Here are the factors listed out. I'll briefly explain each one. One point I would like to emphasize is that all of this data comes from outside sources. We don't generate any of the data ourselves, but we do look at the data, and as much as we can, we try to understand it and make sure it's correct. For example, this year we saw something in the revenue data that gave us concern, so we contacted the Department of Education to ensure that it was correct. We also contacted the Bureau of Economic Analysis, a federal agency, to try to better understand how they did their revisions. The first variable is the revenue per pupil. It is what the local governments actually raise to fund their schools, divided by the number of students, which is the average daily membership. The next variable is the taxable sales per pupil. It's the local taxable sales base. And then the property assessment per pupil, also divided by ADMs. The next variable is a little bit more complicated. It's the residential and farm assessment as a percentage of the total property assessment in the county. And it's used to determine how much of the taxing burden the county is able to export to those who don't live in the county. In other words, the percentage of the property that is held by residents and farms, if that's a high percentage, then it's felt that more of the tax burden would fall on that county's residents. The per capita income number is just a broad measure for the ability to pay by those county residents. And it may also pick up some of the other sources of revenue that are not included in taxable sales and property. And finally, the service burden, it's ADMs, or students divided by population. And it's a reflection of how many students each person in the county is having to support. This quick summary of the effect on each one on the model on fiscal capacity. The sales tax bases and the property tax base and per capita income, they all, if they increase, they all would also increase the county's ability to pay. The percentage of residential and farm property as a percent of total property, if that increases, then the fiscal capacity of the county is considered to decrease. And also, if the number of students per the population of the county increases, then the fiscal capacity is considered to have decreased. And one thing I'd like to point out is that the fiscal capacity is all relative to the other 94 counties in the state. For example, your property tax or sales tax base could increase, but if it increases at a rate less than the average of the other 94 counties, then your fiscal capacity will actually decrease. Now, quickly give you an update of the virtual school students' effect on the fiscal capacity in K through 12 funding in Tennessee. Union County, there was established a virtual school.
Excuse me, we got an intervening question here, Mayor Beats. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if this is the right time to ask this or not, but I read here in my little book that 97% of all the education money in the state is comprised of property tax and sales tax. Is that correct?
I don't know, but it seems like it would be a high percentage.
Mr. Smith, is that about right? 97%? It's got to be right. It's here in my book.
Lenice will comment on that. Mayor Beats, Lenice.
The material that you're reading is an excerpt from one of our reports, and at the time the report was written, yes, sales and property did account for 97% of the revenue.
In my little simplistic way of thinking here, that would hold for across the state. Is that right?
It varies some from place to place. A few areas have some sources of revenue that are more significant than they are in other areas. The one that stands out in my mind is Stewart County. Stewart County, where Land Between the Lakes is, was a TVA installation or a TVA recreational area. And when it was first created, and their payments in lieu of taxes from TVA are much higher than the average for the state. They put all of that money into their school system, and that drives down the percentage that's property and sales tax.
But across the state, let's say it's not right. Say it's 95%. So we take all the money that the counties provide through sales tax and property tax, their local governments. We put it in one big pile, and then we divide that by the number of students in the state, and that's how the money is distributed back? And I know I'm really showing my ignorance here, and I'm just trying to dumb this down to where that I can understand it. But
Mayor Beats, what you've described is the SEBR fiscal capacity formula, I think, to a T. The formula
that simple to a T?
I think it's pretty much that simple. I mean, there's some complications in it. For instance, they have to make some adjustments in the data for changes in sales tax rates when they're gathering all of that up. They use sales tax collections, for instance, to back into what the tax base must be. They don't look at the actual revenue raised. They look at the size of the tax base for the very reasons that Senator Kyle was pointing out, is that you would not want to, in determining what you could do to fund education, take into consideration what you've chosen to do. So if your sales tax rate is 2.25% in one place and 2.75% in another, then you don't want to penalize the place that's got the higher tax rate. So you look at the tax bases. Does that make sense?
As much as anything else does to me today. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir, for allowing me to break your train of thought. But I'm just trying to make this, as we've talked, there's not many people in the state understand this. And I just wish that Robert Greene was the best I ever seen at it, but it's left me since he's left, I guess. So thank you for indulging.
And Lenise has a follow-up thought.
Yeah, just to contrast the two formulas and to, I guess, give sort of an Einstein simplified view of ours, it does basically the same thing, except that it has these three additional factors that it uses to make adjustments in that. So two counties that otherwise have exactly the same size property and sales tax base, in total, if one of them is entirely residential and farm and the other one is much more industrial and commercial, for instance, Rutherford County with Nissan and a big shopping mall, a lot of people come, the Nissan example is probably one of the best ones. The taxes that are paid by Nissan in Rutherford County are not paid by the residents in Rutherford County. They're paid by the people who buy the Nissan cars all around the world. So they're exporting a lot of their tax burden to other places. The same would be true of Saturn, maybe Alcoa and Blount County, places like that. Areas that have very large malls, Rutherford County has a fairly large one. That's where I live. Williamson County has a very large one as well. We're all able to export our taxes to people who reside in other counties as well. So our formula makes an adjustment for that the SEBR formula doesn't. With the understanding that the residents in that area are going to have, in an area without those kind of tax bases, are going to have a little bit harder time raising money for their students. It also makes an adjustment for differences in per capita income, with the understanding that in some areas, well, partly as Michael pointed out, that there are some other smaller sources of revenue that income may pick up. But one of the other things that it does is it makes an adjustment for the kind of thing that Mayor Waters was describing, where you may have a county that's got a rich sales tax base, but it has low incomes. And so the people in that county may not be able to as easily afford to pay as high a sales tax rate or a property tax rate. So we make those kinds of adjustments in our formula, and you have to use, because they're not all dollar amounts, as Michael described, the residential farm ratio is a percentage. You can't just add all that together and divide by 5. You have to use a statistical formula to figure out how much each one of those should count toward the total. And that makes it really important that we use the actual revenue that school systems do spend from local dollars on education in order to ensure that when we estimate the amount that comes from property, from sales, and the adjustment for income and for the service burden and for the exportability, that you don't end up with a number that's bigger or smaller than what school systems are actually doing overall.
Okay, go ahead. Yep. Who am I missing? Senator Henry, I'm sorry.
fiscal capacity increase and decrease chart, I don't believe you have post-employment benefits figured now, do you? The Gatsby so far lets you get by with just a footnote to point out what they are. But I read somewhere that Gatsby is liable to require that you put that above the line, and that's going to change. That's going to change the ability of these local entities to the ability to pay, isn't it?
Yeah, let's talk about that a bit. For those of you who may not have heard, the GASB standards and some of the changes in how local governments account for unfunded liabilities and other benefits of that kind. And the question is whether that shouldn't be factored in, if not at least footnoted in the fiscal capacity analysis, because that's new in terms of accounting standards.
It probably will have some effect on the revenue that school systems are spending, to the extent that they have to raise revenue to create a reserve to cover those liabilities. They may raise revenue to do that. They may reduce expenditures elsewhere to do that. So it would show up in the revenue figure. What fiscal capacity looks at, though, is where your money comes from more than where your money goes. So it won't affect the factors that you see there listed for how the factors that are in our model that will either cause fiscal capacity to go up or go down. Your revenue sources will remain the same, even though you have to now book that liability.
Okay, the virtual school students, they have an effect on our fiscal capacity model, not only for Union County, but across the other 94 counties in the state. They changed the weightings of the 5 variables in the model, so they affect the other 94 counties that way. There was a change in the number of students, virtual school students enrollment. It was about 3,000 for the 12-13 school year, and it decreased by about 700 students for the 13-14 school year. That's an estimate, though. And here's a chart of that. The virtual school students are in brown at the top. I've highlighted the 3 years that were used for this year's fiscal capacity model. As you can see, 2 of the years have virtual school students in it. Next year's fiscal capacity model will include all 3 years that have virtual school students. Here's a table of the revenue per ADM that's used in the model. And on the table on the left is what Union County's revenue per ADM would have been without virtual school students. On the right is what it is with the virtual school students. The addition of the virtual school students caused them to decrease from a rank of 123rd in the state down to last, or $1,165 per student down to $567. The point here is that it seems that the virtual school students are not a burden on Union County, or no local revenue seems to be going to those virtual school students. And here again is a line chart of the same thing. It's the brown at the top is what the revenue per pupil would have been without virtual school students, and then the gray line is what actually happened. The 2 years, 11 and 12 and 13, obviously being much lower than it would have been without the virtual school students. So the effect of the virtual school students, one is that the total cost of the BEP increases. This is because many of the students in virtual schools did not come from public schools. There's also an increase in the local share. The Union County's fiscal capacity decreases so that the state funding for Union County increases. And, of course, that increases the fiscal capacity of the other 95 or 94 counties by the same amount. Are there any questions?
I think we've got it. Beats and I have been talking up here. This is really helpful. No, it is what it is. Are there questions, Michael? Just to put it succinctly, there are several factors that are counterintuitive about it, and there always have been. Particularly the seesaw effect of increase and decreasing fiscal capacity, but that's going to have to be dealt with. The virtual school issue. I've had people ask whether the charter schools affect, and that's different because they come within the LEA. Virtuals are different, but we're glad there's a task force. Yes, sir. Mayor Waters.
Just like to make one note about, I know Senator Kyle talked about local ability to fund education. Well, a lot of folks point out in Sevier County that we have a low tax rate, which we're third or fourth in the state. We do have a low tax rate, and Senator Kyle's not in here. I thought he suggested that those of us in local government need to run on higher taxes, and that would probably be our last run for office if we did that. But the one thing that I think we need to remember about taxes is there's two variables when you're talking about figuring local property tax. That's the assessment and the tax rate. And in Sevier County, what has happened, we have a number of rental cabins, and those rental cabins have sold more than just a regular home would because they bring in revenue. But that affects every homeowner because that sets the assessment in that area when those cabins sell for more. And so a home in Sevier County is probably going to be assessed more than homes in most other areas. So you've got two factors that figure your property tax. And the second factor, the assessment in Sevier County, is higher than most places because of that, the rental issue there. So our homeowners are paying pretty good because they've got one factor that's higher than anywhere else. And, of course, that's when you're talking about the property tax, and we raised in 2007 when the state, in their wisdom, chose to go with this new formula, we lost $8 million, and we had to raise taxes by about 20% in order, and that's a lot in 1 year, in order to cover that loss. And we continue to have to do that in order to make up for the fact that our revenue is not increasing at all. Even when we increase students, our revenue doesn't increase.
Other questions or comments on this item? Hearing none, we thank you. Appreciate it very much. All right, last on the agenda today, members, is behind tab 9, the municipal boundary changes and comprehensive growth plans in the wake of Public Chapter 707
our annexation issue, and Bob Moreo is here to give us an update and answer questions. Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. Can everyone hear me okay?
So far, so good.
Great. Today I'll be presenting an update on our study of municipal boundary changes and comprehensive growth planning in light of the passage of Public Chapter 707, Acts of 2014. With the passage of Public Chapter 707, the General Assembly dramatically changed annexation law in Tennessee. The Act eliminated annexation without consent and strengthens the annexation moratorium established last year by Public Chapter 441, which became effective on May 16 of 2013. Public Chapter 707 also extends TASER's comprehensive study comprehensive review and evaluation of the policies that govern comprehensive growth planning and municipal boundary changes as set forth in Tennessee Code Title VI, Chapters 51 and 58. A draft report on the study will be presented to the Commission for review and comment in late 2014 for approval in January 2015 in order to meet the General Assembly's deadline of February 15 of 2015. Today and in the coming months, we're looking for your guidance for the direction of this continued study. The second report will include issues raised during the debate over and passage of Public Chapter 707, as well as issues that existed before its passage that still remain. It will not include issues that Public Chapter 707 and other legislation have resolved. These resolved issues include the annexation method, that is, that annexation can no longer be done by city ordinance. It will include will not include annexation of agricultural land. Annexation of such land will now require written consent. The vesting of developers' rights to continue after annexation to build according to standards in place at the time of approval. And the extension of city utilities beyond municipal boundaries, that cities cannot annex by ordinance and use tax revenue to subsidize utility extensions. So those are issues that have been resolved. Issues that existed before the passage of Public Chapter 707 that were being studied and we continue to look at are who gets to vote in referendums, the plans of services, de-annexation, informational meetings, annexing non-contiguous land, allocation of tax revenue after annexation, the mutual adjustment of shared city boundaries, the review and update of the county growth plans, allowing cities to unilaterally retract their UGBs, and the role of the Joint Economic Community Development Boards, the JECDBs. The main issues created by the passage of Public Chapter 707 lie in the way that the statutes referred to annexation by ordinance in some places, and there are ambiguities created by language left behind when the Act deleted some parts. Some of the issues discussed previously in the interim report will require no further study. These include voting by mail, annexation approval via petition rather than by a referendum, requiring consent to annex state and federal open land, and allowing individual property owners to petition the city to exclude them from the urban growth boundary. Next, I'll go into further detail about issues that have been resolved by the passage of Public Chapter 707 and other legislation. Again, Public Chapter 707 eliminates cities' authority to annex by ordinance. Beginning May 16, 2015, all annexations in Tennessee will require some form of consent from owners or residents. But this will not necessarily mean that all annexations will require a referendum. The Act does not change the current process for annexing by referendum. It does, however, allow annexations without a referendum when all property owners consent. Annexations with less than 100% owner consent require a referendum. Annexation of agricultural land will require the written consent of its owners, even if the property is part of a larger annexation referendum. Public Chapter 707 extended the moratorium established by Public Chapter 441 through May 15 of 2015 and expanded it to include all types of land, not just that used for residential and agricultural purposes. If a city initiated an annexation of residential or agricultural property before April 15 of 2013, but for some reason did not complete the process before Public Chapter 707 had taken effect, the city can get a waiver from the county legislative body if the city demonstrates that it would suffer substantial financial injury if the annexation does not become operative. This is a continuation of the moratorium as it existed under Public Chapter 441. Cities cannot and have not been able to annex residential or agricultural property without the owner's consent from April 2013 forward. If under the previous moratorium established by Public Chapter 441, a city initiated annexation of commercial or industrial property, again before April 15 of 2014 when Public Chapter 707 took effect, that city can again petition the county for a waiver if it demonstrates it would suffer substantial financial injury if it does not complete the annexation before May of 2015. Under the current moratorium, new annexations can only be by written owner consent. After May 15 of 2015, there will be two ways to annex: written consent of the owners or by a referendum. Cities can annex property by resolution if the owner or owners have consented in writing. The cities cannot annex agricultural land any other way. Without written consent, cities can annex any other land only by referendum, either on their own initiative or when petitioned by interested persons, a term that is not defined in the law. Annexation by consent is generally a simple process, but because there are no specific requirements, each municipality may handle it differently. Many ask for a signed letter from the owners along with a map of the property. Once a city gets written consent, then the city can pass a resolution to annex the property. This resolution may be vulnerable to legal challenge if proper procedures are not followed when adopting it. This is because the resolution is considered to be an expression of the city council's intent or opinion, while a city ordinance is a local law. This legal difference between the power of a resolution versus an ordinance is something we will continue to study. But Tennessee courts have held that a resolution passed with all the formalities of passing an ordinance may operate as an ordinance. Annexation by referendum is a lengthier, costlier process. This may be part of the reason why there have been so few. The U.S. Census Bureau's 2013 Boundary and Annexation Survey showed that there have been just 35 annexations by referendum recorded in Tennessee since 1990, out of more than 6,200 total. And there's little information available on who initiated annexations by any method. Staff has asked several planning officials who initiated these annexations that were done by referendum. And they said that in their communities, many annexations were requested by owners where all or part of the territory in question was outside the city's urban growth boundary. Even in cases where an owner is seeking annexation, if the city did not want to go through the process of reconvening the coordinating committee and approving a growth plan amendment, it had to annex the territory by referendum. To begin the referendum process, whether by its own initiative or by request, the city will pass a resolution proposing annexation by referendum. Again, if it does not have the written consent from all the owners. The city must hold a public hearing on the proposed annexation. Copies of the resolution are posted in 6 places, 3 in the city, 3 in the territory. This notice, including a map of the territory, must also be published in the newspaper at least 7 days before a hearing, and also, because of a new law, now published online. After the hearing and the resolution is adopted to go forth with the referendum, the County Election Commission schedules the referendum between 30 and 60 days after this last notice was published. The Election Commission must also publish notice of the referendum 20 to 30 days before the election, and again a final notice 3 to 10 days before Election Day. Only qualified voters who reside in the territory proposed for annexation may vote in a referendum. A qualified voter is a U.S. citizen, a Tennessee resident, 18 or older, who is not a convicted felon or otherwise prohibited from voting. The annexation must be approved by a majority of the qualified voters voting in the territory proposed to be annexed. A city may also opt to put the question to a vote of the city residents. If city residents are allowed to vote, then a majority in each area, both the area to be annexed and those in the city, must approve the referendum in order for it to pass. The report on Public Chapter 441 also described builders and developers' concerns about annexation changing standards before their projects are completed. Development rights will be vested much earlier in the development process because of the passage of Public Chapter 686 this year, which takes effect January 1st, 2015. This law supersedes a common law rule that development rights have vested only when substantial expenditures have been made in reliance on a permit or plan, by now specifying that the development rights vest either when a building permit is issued upon approval of a preliminary development plan or a final development plan when no preliminary plan was required. The new law protects for a definite amount of time the right to develop according to standards in place when the permit or plan was approved. Anyone whose right to develop property according to county standards vests before annexation is not going to be subject to city's development standards. This vesting period is at least 3 years, and once construction starts, the total vesting period cannot exceed 10 years or up to 15 years for multi-phase developments when those phases were part of the approved plan. One of the central arguments that cities made for unilateral annexation by ordinance was that it allowed them to plan for and extend city utilities beyond their city limits. City officials also asserted that they needed assurance of being able to annex property they extended utilities to in order to capture tax revenue necessary to fully cover the costs associated with extending the service. This issue has been settled this year with the passage of Public Chapter 707 and 628. Again, Public Chapter 707 eliminated the authority of cities to unilaterally annex by ordinance, while Public Chapter 628 made a technical correction to specifically remove language in the law that said that cities could subsidize the public works system with tax revenue. While Public Chapter 707 and other legislation resolve some issues, there are others identified in the interim report that remain. Regarding plans of service, in the interim report, the Commission recommended further consideration of establishing a deadline of 5 years for the provision of services. Tennessee's current law requires annexing cities to develop these plans of services for newly annexed areas, but the law does not provide a clear deadline for when the services must be provided, only that the plans must include a reasonable implementation schedule. In the interim report, the Commission also recommended further consideration of provisions amended out of Senate Bill 1054 that would have required cities to establish standards for delivering the services and provide information on the city's financial ability to provide them. It's also not clear if all the plan of services statutes that applied to annexations by ordinance also apply to annexations by referendum. In its 2007 report, Annexation Handbook for Cities and Towns in Tennessee, the Municipal Technical Advisory Service noted that the statutes governing annexation by referendum only said that the plan must address the same services and timing of services as required in 651-102, which is the statute on annexations by ordinance. Some issues that might not be construed as part of that requirement are the effect of cities' failure to fulfill the plan of services, progress reports on plan of services, amending plans of services, and challenging and enforcing the plans. So while amending the statute might be something to consider, we feel it's likely that a court would interpret the language in a less restrictive way. In the interim report, the Commission also recommended further consideration of holding...
Yes, what do you mean by the court might interpret in a less restrictive way? Does that mean that they would make it equally applicable, in your opinion, or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, we've looked at, between Attorney General's opinions and some court cases, that generally the rule of statutory construction sort of broadly, you want to assess the legislative intent and that different parts of the statute are meant to be read together. So that they would, if it was challenged, they would probably, it's hard to, say what a court might probably rule, but just that they might rule that, the intent was that ordinance and referendum should be read together as a whole.
In peri materia. I just wanted to get that on the record to see, and then we can, others can decide whether that's the outcome they desire or not, but thank you.
In the interim report, the Commission recommended further study and consideration of holding an informational meeting before cities annex property. In 2013, Senate Bill 1381 by Bowling and House Bill 1319 by Huss would have required 3 informational meetings before an annexation by ordinance. Again, we're not going to have annexation by ordinance, but current law requires 1 public hearing before an annexation, as well as 1 for the plan of services, which can often be combined. There was some interest among commissioners in adding an additional meeting. Public Chapter 707 does not extend the right to vote in an annexation referendum to non-resident owners of property in the territory or to corporate landowners. While these groups did not have any say in annexations by ordinance before the new act, the elimination of annexation by ordinance might complicate some amicable annexation of vacant or commercial property. There are some municipal charters that allow non-resident owners to vote in municipal elections. So we feel there would be some precedent for amending the law to allow non-resident owners to vote in annexation referendums. Tennessee's law does not address voting by corporate owners, and specific interest has been expressed as this relates to church properties in particular. In some states where annexation is done by petition and not a referendum election specifically, they do allow legal representatives of corporations to sign those petitions. And concern has also been expressed that where there are multiple qualified voters living on a single parcel, an example being a large apartment complex, the voters in that parcel would have substantially more influence on the results of a referendum than parcels with fewer voters. So that's something we're going to continue to look at. In the interim report, the Commission also supported further consideration of allowing cities to annex non-contiguous areas, which included government-owned property or property for commercial and industrial development where the owner seeks annexation and consents. Because some cities have annexed only those owners who wish to be annexed, this has led to corridor annexations to reach the properties that are not contiguous to city boundaries. And annexing roads without the adjoining property or property and not the road, we found that can lead to confusion over who's responsible for maintenance, emergency services, and other things. As discussed in the interim report on Public Chapter 441, the 1998 Growth Policy Act required local option sales tax and beer wholesale tax revenue collected in annexed areas to continue to go to the county for 15 years and for collections above this hold harmless amount to go to the annexing city. This has not happened with the wholesale beer tax revenue. All of that revenue collected since the Growth Policy Act went into place has instead gone to the annexing cities. This oversight can be avoided going forward using information available to local governments and the Department of Revenue. First, when the affected city and county governments notify the Department of Revenue of the name and location of businesses in an annexed area, which they do so that the department can track the local sales tax collections, they could also report if any of these businesses holds a retail beer license. The department also has a way of identifying likely and possible beer retailers from the list of businesses furnished to it by local governments. Because every sales tax account has a 4-digit business activity code, the department can use this code to determine if any of the businesses identified in annexations were likely possible beer retailers. Furthermore, since the passage of Public Chapter 657 in 2012, the department now receives detailed data from the beer wholesalers that identify all the retailers to whom they sell beer. A simple cross-check of this information with the information they already have on businesses for purposes of the hold harmless requirements and local sales tax would identify those that sell beer and pay wholesale beer taxes. Also in the interim report, the Commission recommended further consideration of giving property owners the right to initiate de-annexation, if doing so does not leave unincorporated islands and if the city is compensated for its investment in certain municipal infrastructure. This was specifically of interest for agricultural properties that had been annexed without consent. Tennessee's law does not currently allow owners or residents to initiate de-annexation from a city. Only the city can initiate this. Cities can also adjust their mutual boundaries by contract to align them with easements, right-of-way, and lot lines. This is for shared boundaries between two cities. There's no requirement in the law that cities have to hold a public hearing before adjusting these boundaries. The Commission in the interim report recommended further consideration of whether to require a public hearing before cities could adjust these shared boundaries. A lot has changed since the first growth plans were adopted. Plans based on outdated information may not be as useful today, but there is no requirement that the plans be reviewed or revised. In the interim report, it was the consensus of the Commission that further consideration be given to requiring that all plans be reviewed and either revised or readopted within 2 years and then every 5 years thereafter. Any proposed change to a growth boundary, no matter how small, currently has to be approved through the entire coordinating committee process. In the interim report, the Commission recommended further consideration of allowing a city to unilaterally retract its own urban growth boundary. The Commission also made some recommendations for further study of Joint Economic Community Development Boards, the JECDBs. JECDBs are required to meet 4 times each year, and their executive committees are also required to meet 4 times a year. The Commission in the interim report recommended allowing local governments to decide how often their JECDBs and executive committees should meet. The Commission has also recommended further consideration of whether functions of the JECDB should be transferred to the Growth Plan Coordinating Committee or perhaps allowing JECDBs to serve as industrial development corporations at the option of a local community. Though industrial development corporations and joint industrial development corporations have the same purpose, powers, and funding sources. They differ in their membership requirements. We have two attachments at the back of your tab. Attachment A shows a comparison of the funding powers and purposes of the JECDBs, the industrial development corporations, and joint industrial development corporations. And attachment B shows a comparison of the membership requirements for each of these groups. I mentioned that there are some issues that Public Chapter 707 created. Remaining references in the statute to ordinances should be removed, and ambiguities created by things left behind when the statutes were amended may need to be addressed. I spoke earlier about the plans of service and how some annexation statutes might need to be amended to make certain that plans of service provisions that apply to annexations by ordinance also apply to those by referendum. For example, Public Chapter 707 deletes most of the language relating to annexation by ordinance out of Tennessee Code Annotated Section 651-102. It leaves in the language that outlines the requirements for the plans of services. That language begins with the phrase, "Before any territory may be annexed under this section." But going forward, annexation will no longer take place under this section. It will be under 651-104. Just a technicality there. Another statute, Section 651-119, requires that a copy of an annexation ordinance and the plan of services section that details with emergency services and a map of the annexed area be sent to an affected emergency communications district when annexing by ordinance. It might be advisable to amend the law to make this statute applicable to annexations by referendum so the districts have the information that they need. Another one in Tennessee Code Annotated Section 651-108 says there that an owner can file a lawsuit against the city to force them to fulfill a plan of services 180 days after annexation by ordinance takes effect and until a plan of services is fulfilled. It doesn't say anything about owners of property annexed by referendum having that right. So the statute might need to be amended to ensure that an owner can enforce the plan of services when their property has been annexed by referendum. In conclusion, a draft report again on the study to include issues raised during the debate over and passage of Public Chapter 707, as well as issues identified in our interim report that existed before that still remain, will be presented to the Commission for review and comment in late 2014. We're looking for your guidance and direction as we continue this study. We will not include some of the interim report issues that Public Chapter 707 and other legislation have resolved. This report will be ready for approval in January of 2015 in order to meet the General Assembly's deadline of February 2015. Thank you all very much, and special thanks to Leah for helping me through my first presentation to the Commission. I'm happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Mr. Vice Chairman, we have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may have missed it somewhere, Bob, but if a referendum is called for, does it specify in the law when that referendum should be held? Should it be held in conjunction with another election? Of course, a special referendum would cost the taxpayers a lot more money. Is that addressed anywhere in the law?
The current Public Chapter 707 didn't change the existing referendum process, and that process says that the Election Commission schedules a referendum between 30 and 60 days after the last notice had been given. So it does not necessarily fall within a regularly scheduled election.
Okay, so in many cases it would be a special referendum on its own.
I would imagine this, if the cities would time how they handle these things to try to get them to coincide with the election, that might be possible, but it doesn't specify that.
Okay, Bob, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor. Other questions, Representative Carter? I want to mention that Representative Carter and I have been talking, and he corresponding with lists of things, lest we overlook some of the changes that need to be focused on and some of the open questions that remain. Bob, your itemization here is pretty consistent with what Representative Carter has been tracking, but it is thought-provoking because there are a number of issues like these, and we look forward to the report. I've had constituents contacting me. I think Representative Carter's had some over his way about exactly how things work here in transition, and this is very helpful. Mike, I didn't know if you had any comments you wanted to. You're not seeking recognition, but I don't know if you wanted to say a word.
The only comment I'd like to make is that I've spent a lot of time since the session ended looking at this, and when I got the book and read it, it's obvious they've spent a lot of time. It's an excellent report, and you just did a great job, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Other questions here on this item? Doesn't look as though we do. Thank you, Bob. Look forward to continuing to work together. Well done.
Thank you.
Lanice, let's see. We set dates, and I believe we have. Do we have our? On the second page of the agenda, there are dates proposed for our next meetings. As you will see, in September, are there any preferences here? The third and fourth, or the 10th and the 11th? All right, checking here. All right, so the alternative is November. Is that the alternative for the next meeting? November for these three different meetings. Got to have all three. Okay, the third and fourth is better for me. What about the third and the fourth, y'all? I understand 10th and 11th works. I've got a conflict there. Is the third and fourth equally acceptable? Will that work? I know it's all right. Thank you very much. Why don't we let's say third and fourth? Yes, for the next meeting. And then, what's your preference? We have to have each of these. We need 3 more meetings, and so in November, 19th and 20th is proposed. Any objections there that we know of? Okay, and then in January, my crystal ball grows dim. We might nail that down. Let's hold those dates tentatively, if you all would. We can, at our next meeting, we can try to firm up the January possibilities, but we're trying to stay, in the last week. We reconvene. Do we reconvene on the 12th? 13th. Yeah, so the Senate, the General Assembly will be back in session the week of the 12th, so we have space issues and everything, but we'll try to firm that up. Senator Kyle?
Not to intrude, I would just point out that generally in organizational session we've gone home for 2 weeks.
Right.
And consequently we would not be up here during that time.
Yeah, and so it works both ways. In other words, the perspective of some is that since we're in organizational session and the General Assembly's not here, that's a great time to meet. But conversely, those of us who are in the General Assembly and have several weeks where we don't have to be here sort of look at it the other way. In Senator Kyle's case, he may not care. He's hoping he won't care. But let's reserve that until our next meeting, and we'll decide on the January date. But keep those sort of penciled in, if you would. All right, is there anything further for the good of the order? Thank you all very much for your time and attention. Appreciate it. Senator Kyle.
Mr. Chairman, not to be presumptuous, the meeting dates means that if things work out like I'm hoping they work out, this will be my last meeting on the TASER Commission, and I will not have an opportunity to thank each and every one of you and to thank the staff for the experience of serving on TASER. The work is very important. The information which we receive is very important. It has been a great deal of I've enjoyed meeting each and every one of you and working with every one of you. I wish every one of you all the best. And if I do see you at this meeting on the 10th or 11th, I really won't be in a very good mood. But that being said, I do appreciate, I just wanted to say I didn't think I'd have a chance to thank y'all and thank the staff for doing that because of I would no longer be in the General Assembly in September. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Kyle. And we talked about this not in relation to TASER, but Senator Kyle and I talked in the Senate when we were still in session, and to whether to acknowledge his service with thanks on the presumption that he will be successful in his election to the bench or not, and at that point he encouraged us not to be presumptuous so as to not jinx. But we've got some great looking literature here and things are looking good. So, but you may not get off that easily. You may be forced to come back and let us laud your service in person. But thank you for what you've done, and you know how I feel about the privilege of having served together. You've made an invaluable contribution, and I'm sure you will continue to do so one way or another. Thank you very much. If there's nothing further, then, ladies and gentlemen, we will adjourn.